Millionaire helps the pregnant black woman who was evicted. 20 Minutes discovers the truth that. In this heartwarming story, join us as we delve into the journey of a compassionate millionaire who steps forward to help a pregnant black woman facing eviction. When he learns about her dire situation, he feels a deep urge to make a difference in her life. Little did anyone know, his simple act of kindness would unravel a series of unexpected truths and emotional revelations. It was a cold, rainy morning in Chicago when Amara Ellis stood on the sidewalk, clutching her pregnant belly, watching as officers carried the last of her belongings onto the street. Alone, desperate, and with nowhere to go, she thought her world had truly fallen apart. But fate has a strange way of working. Across the street, a man in a tailored suit stopped in his tracks. He didn't know why he felt compelled to cross that street, but that single decision would change both their lives forever. The shrill wail of a siren cut through the air, its sound reverberating off the damp, gray buildings of a drizzly Chicago morning. Amara Ellis stood frozen on the sidewalk, her arms wrapped protectively around her protruding belly. The rain fell in fine sheets, soaking through her worn coat, but she barely noticed. Her brown eyes, glistening with unshed tears, remained fixed on the small apartment she'd called home for 5 years. Her belongings, hastily packed into shabby boxes, were now being piled on the wet concrete by 2 officers who moved with a mechanical efficiency. "Please," Amara begged, her voice trembling, the drizzle masking the tears streaming down her face. "Just a few more weeks. I'll have the money. My baby. He's due any day now." One of the officers, a middle-aged man with a gruff demeanor, hesitated, his hand briefly twitching as if to reach out, but he didn't. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his tone devoid of malice but firm. "We've got our orders." Amara's knees threatened to give way. A gust of wind whipped through the street, carrying away the last remnants of her pride. She felt like the rain itself, a constant fall, unnoticed and unrelenting. Alone and pregnant, with no family to turn to, she was trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The weight of the past few months, job rejections, mounting debts, and the suffocating realization that the father of her child would never return, crushed her. As the officers continued their grim task, Amara's gaze dropped to her swollen belly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know how I'm going to do this." On the opposite side of the street, Nathan Pierce briskly strode down the wet pavement, an umbrella shielding him from the rain. His sharp navy suit clung perfectly to his frame, and the leather briefcase in his hand added to the image of a man accustomed to power and control. At 38, Nathan had risen to prominence as the CEO of Pierce Innovations, a tech conglomerate that had revolutionized the industry. His schedule was packed with back-to-back meetings, each promising lucrative deals and opportunities. But that morning, something else caught his attention. As he glanced across the street, Nathan's steps faltered, his piercing blue eyes locked on the commotion on Amara. At first, it was the vulnerability of her figure that drew him in, the way she stood like a solitary island amidst a storm, her arms wrapped around her belly with a kind of fierceness that tugged at something buried deep within him. Then he saw her face, a blend of desperation and defiance, of a woman fighting a losing battle against an unforgiving world. His instincts told him to move on. He had a meeting with investors that couldn't be delayed, but his feet wouldn't listen. For reasons he couldn't fully explain, Nathan felt compelled to intervene. "Excuse me," he called out as he crossed the street, his authoritative tone cutting through the sound of the rain and the officers' muffled conversations. "What's going on here?" The younger officer, startled, turned to face him. "This woman's being evicted, sir," he said, his tone neutral but slightly wary of Nathan's commanding presence. "And what does she owe?" Nathan asked, his voice firm. "Sir, you don't have to," Amara began, her voice weak yet laced with embarrassment. Nathan raised a hand gently, silencing her. His gaze, steady and resolute, never wavered. "How much?" he repeated. The officer hesitated, then gestured to a landlord standing nearby. A balding, impatient man who looked like he had been dealing with tenants like Amara his whole life. The landlord quickly rattled off the amount, adding with a sneer, "And I've been patient long enough." Nathan pulled out his phone, his jaw tightening. "I'll pay it, all of it, including the next 3 months." Gasps rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. The landlord, stunned, quickly agreed, while Amara could only stare at Nathan in disbelief. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Within minutes, the transaction was complete, and the officers began retreating, muttering about how this was the strangest eviction they'd ever seen. When the street fell silent again, Amara found herself alone with Nathan. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and for the first time that morning, the tension in her chest loosened slightly. I I don't know what to say, she stammered, her voice trembling with gratitude and lingering disbelief. Nathan's serious expression softened as he offered a small smile. There's no need to thank me. Everyone needs help sometimes. But why? She asked, her brow furrowing. You don't even know me. Nathan hesitated. How could he explain the inexplicable pull he felt toward her? Let's just say I know what it's like to feel like the world's against you, he said finally, his tone tinged with melancholy. And I'd like to help, if you'll let me. Amara studied him carefully, searching his face for ulterior motives. She found none. Instead, she saw a man who carried his own burdens, though his tailored suit and polished demeanor masked them well. Amara Ellis, she said, offering her hand, a gesture both cautious and grateful. Nathan Pierce, he replied, shaking her hand. The moment their hands touched, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. Ellis, he murmured almost to himself. That name, it sounds familiar. Are you from Chicago originally? No, Amara said with a faint smile, shaking her head. I grew up in a small town in southern Illinois. I came here to start over. Nathan nodded, though a shadow passed over his features. Something about her stirred a distant memory he couldn't quite place, but he quickly pushed it aside. Well, Amara, he said, his tone shifting to one of gentle encouragement. Starting over isn't easy, but maybe this can be your first step. As the rain subsided and the city resumed its indifferent hum, Nathan made an impulsive offer. Would you let me buy you a coffee? We could talk about how else I might be able to help. Amara hesitated, her defenses rising instinctively. But there was something about him, a sincerity she couldn't ignore. And for the first time in months, hope flickered in the shadows of her despair. She nodded. Okay, a coffee would be nice. Together they walked toward a small cafe, unaware that this moment, this chance meeting on a rainy Chicago morning, would change their lives forever. The small cafe on the corner was a welcome retreat from the cold, rainy streets of Chicago. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the gentle hum of conversation as Nathan and Amara settled at a quiet table in the back. Nathan pulled out a chair for her, his polished manners catching Amara off guard. She hadn't been shown such courtesy in a long time. Thank you, she said softly, lowering herself into the seat and instinctively placing a protective hand on her belly. The simple act seemed to draw Nathan's gaze, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his expression before he looked away. As the server approached, Nathan ordered a cappuccino and looked at Amara. What would you like? Just tea, she replied, her voice still carrying a hint of uncertainty. The server left, and for a moment they sat in silence. The cafe felt warm and safe, but Amara couldn't shake the lingering sense of disbelief. Who was this man, and why had he chosen to intervene in her life? So, Amara, Nathan began, breaking the silence, tell me about yourself. How did you end up in that situation this morning? Amara hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. Part of her wanted to guard her story, to keep the shame and heartbreak hidden. But there was something about Nathan, his steady gaze, his calm presence, that made her want to trust him. It's a long story, she said, her lips curving into a faint, weary smile. But I guess we have time for the short version. Nathan nodded, his attention fully on her. I'm all ears. Amara took a deep breath and began. She spoke of her childhood in a small Illinois town, of a father who drank too much and a mother who disappeared when she was a teenager. She talked about leaving her hometown in search of something better, only to find herself lost in the chaos of Chicago. Temporary jobs, bad luck, and an unexpected pregnancy had left her barely holding on. When she mentioned the baby's father, her voice faltered. It was just one night, she admitted, lowering her gaze to the table. I don't even know his real name. He disappeared before I could tell him. Nathan's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he kept his voice even. You've been through a lot, he said gently, and you've been handling it on your own. That's no small feat. Amara shrugged, though her eyes glistened with emotion. What choice do I have? I have to keep going. For him. She placed her hand over her belly again, and Nathan's gaze followed the motion. A brief flicker of recognition stirred in his chest, but he pushed it aside. This was about helping her, not about dissecting his own feelings. Well, Nathan said, his voice resolute, you're not alone anymore. At least not if you don't want to be. The rain had stopped by the time they left the cafe. The afternoon sun peeked through the clouds, casting a soft light over the city streets. Amara felt lighter than she had in months, though the uncertainty of her future still loomed large. Nathan walked beside her, his long strides effortlessly matching her slower pace. Amara, he began, his tone thoughtful, I meant what I said earlier. I want to help you, not just with your rent, but with rebuilding your life. She stopped, turning to face him. Why? Why would you do that for someone you just met? Nathan hesitated, his hands sliding into his coat pockets. Because I know what it's like to feel like the ground has been pulled out from under you, he admitted. And because I just have a feeling you're worth helping. Amara searched his face, her heart tugged by the sincerity in his voice. She wanted to believe him, but trust didn't come easily. And how exactly would you help? She asked cautiously. For starters, Nathan said, I can offer you a job. My company is always looking for administrative assistants. It's nothing glamorous, but it's steady work and good pay. Amara's eyes widened. A job? Just like that? Nathan chuckled softly. Well, you'd have to fill out an application like everyone else. But let's just say I'd make sure it lands on the right desk. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. I don't know what to say. I'm not sure I'd even be good at it. I've never worked in an office before. You'd learn, Nathan said confidently. And you'd have support. You've already proven you're resilient, Amara. That's half the battle. She looked at him for a long moment, weighing her options. Accepting his help meant stepping into a world she didn't fully understand, but it also meant a chance, a real chance to build something better for herself and her baby. Finally, she nodded. Okay, I'll give it a try. Nathan's smile was warm and genuine. Good. We'll get everything set up tomorrow. As they approached Amara's apartment building, now safe thanks to Nathan's intervention, she turned to him. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice full of emotion. I don't think I can ever repay you for what you've done. Nathan shook his head. You don't owe me anything, Amara. We all need someone to believe in us now and then. She hesitated, then added, Why me? Out of all the people in the world, why did you stop for me? Nathan's gaze softened, but his answer was deliberately vague. Let's just say I believe in fate. As she unlocked the door and stepped inside, Amara turned back to him, a small smile on her lips. Maybe fate isn't so bad after all. Nathan watched as the door closed behind her, a faint smile of his own playing on his face. But as he walked away, his thoughts turned inward. The name Ellis, the vulnerability in her eyes, the faint stirrings of a memory he couldn't quite place. They all tugged at something deep within him. He didn't know what it was yet, but he intended to find out. Amara adjusted the hem of her secondhand blazer as she stepped through the glass doors of Pierce Innovations. The sheer scale of the building, a towering skyscraper that dominated the Chicago skyline, made her feel small, but she kept her head high. The baby shifted in her belly as if sensing her unease, and she placed a comforting hand there. Mommy's got this, she whispered, steeling herself before stepping into the polished marble lobby. The receptionist, a polished woman with sharp eyes, glanced up and offered a professional but distant smile. You must be Amara Ellis. Mr. Pierce is expecting you. Take the elevators to the 27th floor. Amara nodded, murmured her thanks, and made her way to the elevators. As the numbers climbed higher, her nerves grew tighter. She couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong in a place like this, surrounded by sleek suits and the hum of corporate efficiency. But when the elevator doors opened, she was greeted by a familiar face. Nathan stood there looking effortlessly composed in his tailored suit. His smile was warm, instantly putting her at ease. Good morning, he said, stepping aside to let her out. Welcome to your first day. Morning, Amara replied, her voice tinged with nervousness. I'm not sure I'm cut out for this. Nathan chuckled, his tone reassuring. You'll be fine. I'll show you to your desk. As they walked through the bustling office, whispers followed them. Employees stole glances, curious about the visibly pregnant newcomer, escorted by the CEO himself. Amara tried to ignore the stares, focusing on Nathan's steady presence. He introduced her to her new supervisor, Olivia Harper, a sharp yet kind woman in her late 30s. Olivia welcomed Amara with genuine warmth and showed her the ropes. By midday, Amara felt more confident. The work was straightforward, and Olivia proved to be a patient mentor. Still, the lingering whispers around the office reminded her of how out of place she felt. That evening, Nathan sat in his expansive office, staring at a photograph he had unearthed from a stack of old event materials. His heart pounded as he studied it. The picture was from the Pierce Innovations product launch party months ago, a night he had all but forgotten. Yet there she was, standing beside him, laughing at something someone had said, her eyes sparkling with the kind of carefree joy he hadn't seen in her since they met again. Amara. It all came rushing back. The flashes of that evening, the wine, the fleeting connection with a stranger whose name he hadn't caught. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Could it really be her? Could he have been so blind not to recognize her immediately? The coincidence was too glaring to ignore. He had to know the truth. The next morning, Amara was sorting files at her desk when Nathan approached. His expression was calm but intense, a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Amara, he said softly, can we talk for a moment? Amara blinked, startled by the sudden request. Of course, she replied, standing up and following him to his office. The walk felt interminable, her mind racing with possibilities. When they were seated, Nathan pulled out the photograph and placed it on the desk between them. Do you remember this night? He asked, his voice careful, measured. Amara froze. Her eyes fell on the photo, and memories came rushing back, blurry and fragmented but undeniable. The party, the laughter, the man with piercing blue eyes who had offered her a moment of solace in an otherwise lonely life. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I remember bits and pieces. It was a long night. Nathan leaned forward, his gaze searching hers. Amara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Could I be the father of your child? The room seemed to shrink around her. Her breath caught in her throat as the weight of his question sank in. She looked away, her mind racing, but the answer was clear. She nodded slowly, her voice trembling. It's possible. I didn't know your name that night, and I never thought I'd see you again. Nathan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. He stood and paced the room, processing the revelation. I don't remember much from that night either, he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. But if there's even a chance that this baby is mine, I want to be there, for both of you. Amara watched him carefully, her emotions a tumultuous storm. Nathan, she said cautiously, I didn't come to you for help because of this. I didn't even realize it was you until now. I know, he said, stopping to face her, and I believe you, but this changes everything. You're not in this alone anymore. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Amara couldn't focus, her mind consumed by the implications of what had happened. Meanwhile, Nathan wrestled with his own emotions. His life, so meticulously planned and controlled, was now entangled with hers in ways he hadn't anticipated. That evening, Nathan called Amara to meet him at a nearby park. She hesitated but agreed, sensing the importance of the conversation. The autumn air was crisp, the leaves crunching beneath their feet as they walked. Nathan finally broke the silence. Amara, I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to be part of your life and the baby's life. If you'll let me. Amara stopped, looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. I don't know what to say, she admitted. This is all happening so fast. Nathan took a deep breath, his blue eyes earnest. Then let's take it one step at a time. No expectations, no pressure. Just let me be here for you. For the first time in years, Amara felt a flicker of hope. She nodded, a tentative smile forming on her lips. Okay, one step at a time. As they stood beneath the glow of a street lamp, the weight of their shared revelation lingered between them, heavy yet full of possibility. Neither of them could predict what lay ahead, but for the first time, they weren't facing it alone. The days following Nathan's revelation were tense and filled with an undercurrent of unease. Amara continued working at Pierce Innovations, but the office buzzed with whispers. Her sudden hiring and visible connection to Nathan had already sparked speculation, but now the rumors took a sharper edge. Words like favoritism and scandal floated through the air like venomous arrows, though no one dared say them to her face. Amara felt the weight of the scrutiny, her steps slower as she navigated the sleek office halls. Every stolen glance and muffled conversation chipped away at her fragile confidence. Even Olivia, her supportive supervisor, seemed more cautious, her words carefully measured. One afternoon, while filing reports in the break room, she overheard two colleagues talking. "Did you hear? She's pregnant with his baby. That's why she got the job," one whispered. "She must be playing the long game," the other sneered. "Women like her know how to get ahead." Amara's chest tightened, her hands trembling as she gripped the folder in her hands. She wanted to confront them, to scream that they didn't know her story, but the fear of drawing more attention held her back. Instead, she returned to her desk, swallowing her pride and forcing herself to focus. That evening, Nathan found her still working late, her posture tense and her expression weary. "Amara," he said softly, his concern evident, "you've been here all day. Is everything okay?" She hesitated, then met his gaze, her vulnerability laid bare. "People are talking about me, about us. They think I don't deserve to be here." Nathan's jaw tightened, his protective instincts flaring. "I'll put an end to it," he said firmly. "No," Amara interjected, her voice steady but tinged with exhaustion. "That will only make it worse. I need to prove them wrong. Let me handle it." Nathan studied her for a moment, his respect for her resolve growing. "You're stronger than you think," he said finally, "but you don't have to face this alone." The following morning, Nathan's secretary knocked on his office door, her expression hesitant. "Mr. Pierce, there's a visitor here to see you," she said. "She claims to be your late wife's sister." Nathan's breath caught. He hadn't seen or spoken to Catherine Rowan since Sarah's funeral 5 years earlier. Memories of that time, of grief, guilt, and the suffocating weight of loss, flooded back as he nodded. "Send her in." Catherine entered, her presence commanding despite her casual attire. Her auburn hair was streaked with gray, and the lines on her face spoke of years of pain. She looked at Nathan with a mix of sorrow and accusation. "Nathan," she said, her voice steady but cold, "it's been a long time." "It has," he replied, gesturing for her to sit. "What brings you here?" Catherine didn't mince words. "I've heard about the baby and about the woman. Is it true?" Nathan's stomach tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, Amara is pregnant, and there's a strong possibility the baby is mine." Catherine's lips pressed into a thin line. "Do you even think about Sarah anymore? About what you lost?" The question hit him like a blow, but he steadied himself. "Every day," he said quietly. "But Sarah is gone, Catherine, and I can't spend the rest of my life trapped in the past. This baby, she's a second chance for me." Catherine's gaze softened, though her voice remained firm. "I'm not here to judge you, Nathan, but you need to understand something. Sarah was pregnant when she died." The words landed like a thunderclap. Nathan stared at her, his mind racing. What are you talking about?" "She found out just days before the accident," Catherine continued, her voice breaking slightly. "She wanted to surprise you, to tell you that night. That's why she insisted on coming home early." Nathan felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. He leaned back in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests as he tried to process the revelation. The weight of his guilt, already immense, now threatened to crush him completely. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he managed to choke out. "Because I didn't think you could handle it," Catherine said. "But now, seeing you move on, I needed you to know. Sarah deserves to be remembered." Nathan nodded slowly, his heart heavy with grief and regret. "She will be," he promised, "always." That evening, Nathan visited Amara at her apartment. She welcomed him in, though she immediately sensed the tension in his demeanor. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Nathan hesitated, then sat down beside her on the worn couch. "Catherine came to see me today," he admitted. "She told me something I didn't know. Something about Sarah." Amara listened intently as Nathan recounted Catherine's revelation. Her heart ached for him, for the layers of grief he carried so quietly. When he finished, she placed a comforting hand on his. "Nathan, I can't imagine how hard this must be for you, but you can't let it define your future." Nathan looked at her, his blue eyes filled with gratitude. "You're right," he said, "and I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm here, for you and the baby." Amara smiled softly, her trust in him deepening. "I believe you." As they sat together, the unspoken bond between them grew stronger, but the challenges ahead loomed larger. The ghosts of Nathan's past and the scrutiny of their present threatened to unravel everything they were building. A few nights later, Amara was organizing baby clothes when she felt a sharp but not unpleasant sensation in her belly. She gasped, her hands instinctively pressing against her stomach. Nathan, who was helping assemble a crib, looked up. "What is it? Are you okay?" She smiled, her eyes wide with wonder. "The baby, she kicked." Nathan immediately crossed the room and knelt beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly until Amara guided them to the right spot. A moment later he felt it, a tiny, powerful movement beneath his palm. His eyes filled with awe. "She's really there," he whispered. "It's incredible." Amara's gaze softened, her fears momentarily forgotten. She knows her dad is close. Nathan looked at her, his heart swelling with a mixture of emotions. "Amara," he said softly, "thank you for letting me be part of this." "You don't have to thank me," she replied. "You've already done so much." As they shared the intimate moment, they both felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, they believed they could face it together. A week after Catherine's visit, she showed up at Nathan's apartment unannounced. Her demeanor was calmer this time, her eyes less accusatory. Amara was there too, sitting on the living room couch with her feet propped up and a glass of water in her hand. When Catherine entered, her eyes briefly flickered to Amara's swollen belly before she turned to Nathan. "I brought something," Catherine said, setting a small, weathered box on the coffee table. "These were Sarah's. I thought maybe they could help you understand why I came to see you." Amara watched silently as Nathan opened the box, revealing a collection of photographs, letters, and trinkets. One picture in particular caught his eye. A young, beaming Sarah holding what looked like a baby blanket. "She made that blanket," Catherine said quietly. "She was so excited about the baby." Nathan's throat tightened. He traced the edges of the photograph with his fingertips, his emotions raw. Amara, sensing his distress, reached out and placed a reassuring hand on his arm. Catherine cleared her throat, her voice softer now. "I came here angry, Nathan, but seeing you and hearing how much you care about this baby, I think Sarah would have wanted this. For you to move forward." Nathan looked up, his gratitude unspoken but evident in his expression. "Thank you," he said simply. Amara broke the silence. "Catherine, would you like to stay for dinner? I think we could all use a little more time to talk." Catherine hesitated but nodded. "I'd like that." While the bonds between Nathan, Amara, and Catherine grew stronger, the pressure at Pierce Innovations reached a boiling point. Rumors about Nathan's personal life continued to spread, and whispers of impropriety began reaching the boardroom. One afternoon, Nathan was summoned to a meeting with the company's board of directors. The tension in the room was palpable as the chairman, a stern man named Gerald Winslow, addressed him. "Nathan, we've received concerns about your recent decisions," Gerald began. "The hiring of Ms. Ellis, your public association with her, and the potential scandal involving her pregnancy have raised questions about your judgment." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Amara's hiring was based on her potential and resilience, not favoritism," he replied firmly. "And my personal life is just that, personal." Gerald leaned back in his chair, his gaze calculating. Be that as it may, the perception of impropriety can be just as damaging as the reality. We're recommending you take a temporary leave of absence to protect the company's image. The words hit Nathan like a blow. His company, his legacy, was slipping out of his control. But even as anger bubbled beneath the surface, he knew fighting the board would only escalate the situation. "I'll consider it," he said through gritted teeth, rising from his chair. "But understand this. I won't abandon the people who make this company what it is." That evening, Nathan returned home to find Amara in the nursery, carefully folding tiny clothes into a dresser drawer. Her presence was a balm to his frayed nerves, her calm a stark contrast to the chaos of his day. "Rough day?" she asked, glancing up at him. "You could say that," he replied, sitting on the edge of the crib. "The board wants me to step aside temporarily. They think my personal life is a distraction." Amara frowned, her heart aching for him. "I'm so sorry, Nathan. This is all because of me, isn't it?" He shook his head. "Number, don't blame yourself. The board was just waiting for a reason to push back. But it's made me realize something." "What's that?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "I think we need to get away from here," he said. "From the city, the rumors, all of it. My family has a house in Vermont, a quiet place where we could start fresh. Just the three of us." Amara blinked, surprised by the proposal. "Leave Chicago?" "I know it's a lot to ask," Nathan admitted, "but I think it could be good for us, for the baby. A real chance to figure out what we want our lives to look like." Amara looked down at her belly, her mind swirling with thoughts. Leaving Chicago meant leaving behind the only semblance of a life she had managed to build. But the idea of a new beginning, far from the prying eyes and judgmental whispers, was undeniably appealing. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steady. "Let's do it." The following weekend, Catherine returned for dinner. Amara and Nathan had already decided to share their plan with her, knowing it would affect her too. "We're leaving Chicago," Nathan announced over the meal. "We're moving to Vermont." Catherine looked surprised but not upset. "That's a big change. Why Vermont?" "It's peaceful," Nathan explained, "and we need a fresh start." Catherine nodded slowly. "I can understand that, but I'd like to stay in touch if that's okay. I want to be part of this baby's life." Amara smiled, her affection for Catherine growing. "Of course. Your family, Catherine. And we want our daughter to know about her namesake." Catherine's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more to me than you know." As the moving truck pulled away from the apartment, Amara and Nathan stood on the sidewalk, their fingers intertwined. The city that had been both a place of struggle and a stage for their improbable meeting now felt like a closed chapter. "Are you ready for this?" Nathan asked, his voice gentle. Amara looked at him, her smile tentative but hopeful. "I think so. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Nathan leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "We'll make this work, I promise." As they drove out of Chicago, the horizon stretched before them, filled with the unknown. But for Nathan and Amara, it wasn't just an escape. It was the beginning of something new. Together, they would build a life for their daughter, a life rooted not in the past but in the promise of the future. The drive to Vermont felt like a journey into a different world. Amara watched the landscape shift from towering skyscrapers to rolling hills, the trees painted in hues of gold and crimson. The farther they traveled from Chicago, the more her shoulders relaxed, as if the weight of the city's scrutiny was lifting with every mile. Nathan turned down the long gravel driveway leading to the Pierce family estate. The house came into view, nestled amidst a canopy of maple trees. It was a sprawling colonial-style home with white shutters, a wraparound porch, and an inviting charm that made Amara's breath catch. "This is beautiful," she said softly, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "It's been in my family for generations," Nathan replied, a touch of nostalgia in his voice. "I used to come here every summer as a kid. It always felt like a safe haven." As they stepped out of the car, the crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of wood smoke. Nathan opened the front door, revealing a warm interior with polished wooden floors, a stone fireplace, and large windows that bathed the space in natural light. "This will be home," he said, his voice gentle, "for as long as you want it to be." Amara looked at him, her eyes glistening. "It already feels like home." The first weeks in Vermont were a mix of challenges and quiet joys. Amara found solace in the simplicity of country life. She spent her mornings walking through the woods, the sound of crunching leaves underfoot grounding her. The afternoons were filled with preparations for the baby, assembling furniture, folding clothes, and decorating the nursery with soft pastels. Nathan split his time between helping Amara and managing his company remotely. The barn on the property had been converted into a home office, complete with high-speed internet and all the tools he needed to stay connected. Despite the distance from Pierce Innovations, he found clarity in the slower pace, his mind free to focus on the company's future without the constant noise of the city. One evening, as Amara sat by the fireplace knitting a tiny blanket, Nathan joined her with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. He handed her one and settled onto the couch beside her. "You're good at this," he said, nodding toward her knitting. She laughed softly. "I'm learning. I thought it'd be nice to make something for her." Nathan's gaze softened. "She's lucky to have you." Amara looked down, a faint blush creeping across her cheeks. "She's lucky to have you too." One morning, as Nathan was reviewing emails, his phone buzzed with a message from Olivia Harper, Amara's former supervisor. Olivia. "Nathan, I hope you're doing well. Things at Pierce Innovations have taken a turn. The board is making decisions that go against everything you built the company to stand for. We need you back, or at least your guidance." Nathan frowned, his mind racing. He had expected turbulence after stepping back, but the thought of the company's vision being compromised filled him with unease. He didn't want to disrupt the life he and Amara were building, but he also couldn't ignore Olivia's plea. "What's wrong?" Amara asked as she walked into the room, her hand resting lightly on her belly. Nathan hesitated before showing her the message. "It's Olivia. She says the board is making questionable decisions." Amara read the message, her brow furrowing. "Do you want to go back?" Nathan shook his head. "Not to Chicago, but I can't let the company lose its way." Amara thought for a moment, then smiled. "What if we bring the company here?" Nathan blinked. "What do you mean?" "You said this place was your safe haven," she explained. "Why not turn it into a retreat for innovation? A place where your team can come to focus, away from the city. It could help the company and let us stay here." Nathan stared at her, impressed by her insight. "That's, actually brilliant." A week later, Catherine arrived at the estate, her car kicking up gravel as she pulled into the driveway. Amara greeted her at the door, her smile warm despite the chilly air. "Welcome," Amara said. "Come in. It's so good to see you." Catherine entered, her arms filled with gifts for the baby. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, looking around at the cozy home. "I just wanted to see how you're settling in." Amara led her to the living room, where Nathan was tending to the fireplace. He looked up, his face lighting up with a genuine smile. "Catherine, it's good to see you." As they sat together, Catherine shared stories of Sarah, her voice laced with both sorrow and fondness. "Sarah would have loved this place," she said, looking out the window at the golden leaves. "She always dreamed of a quiet life like this." Amara reached for Catherine's hand, squeezing it gently. "She's still a part of this life. We named the baby after her for a reason." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. "Thank you for that. It means the world to me." As the first snow blanketed the Vermont countryside, Amara and Nathan found themselves settling into a rhythm. The nursery was ready, their plans for the retreat were in motion, and Catherine had become a welcome visitor, bridging the past with the present. One snowy evening, as the three of them sat by the fire with cups of mulled cider, Nathan looked at Amara and Catherine, feeling an unfamiliar but welcome sensation: contentment. "This feels right," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Like we're building something real." Amara smiled at him, her hand resting on her belly. "We are." Catherine raised her glass, a rare smile gracing her lips. "To Sarah," she said. "To family." As the snow continued to fall outside, Amara, Nathan, and Catherine found themselves bound not by tragedy, but by hope, ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring. The house in Vermont stood at the end of a winding road, surrounded by acres of lush forest and fields. The sprawling estate, with its ivy-covered stone walls and weathered wooden shutters, exuded a timeless charm. Amara stepped out of the car, cradling her belly as she took in the fresh mountain air. It was a stark contrast to the noise and chaos of Chicago, a silence so profound it felt almost surreal. "This is it," Nathan said, stepping beside her. His voice was soft, a mixture of nostalgia and hope. "It belonged to my grandparents. I used to spend summers here as a kid." "It's beautiful," Amara murmured, her awe genuine. She turned to him, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Do you think we'll fit here?" Nathan placed a reassuring hand on her back. "We'll make it fit," he promised, "for us and for her." They walked toward the house, the crunch of gravel beneath their feet echoing in the stillness. Inside, the home was warm and inviting, filled with memories of generations past. Amara ran her fingers along the edge of an old oak table, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "This could work," she said, her smile tentative but sincere. "It will," Nathan replied, his determination unwavering. The days that followed were a whirlwind of unpacking and adjustments. Nathan converted the old barn into a home office, complete with high-speed internet and video conferencing equipment, so he could continue managing Pierce Innovations from afar. Amara, meanwhile, found solace in the kitchen and garden, discovering an unexpected joy in nurturing the land. One afternoon, as Amara knelt in the soil planting a row of flowers, Nathan approached with a steaming cup of tea. "You're a natural," he remarked, watching her work. She glanced up at him, wiping dirt from her hands onto her jeans. "I think I needed this," she admitted. "Something simple, something grounding." Nathan nodded, his gaze lingering on her. "I think we both did." As the weeks passed, their bond deepened. Quiet evenings spent by the fireplace turned into nights of shared stories and laughter. The house, once filled with echoes of the past, now began to hum with the promise of a future. One crisp autumn morning, the sound of tires crunching on the gravel driveway interrupted their breakfast. Nathan rose from his chair, peering out the window to see a familiar car pulling in. "It's Catherine," he said, his surprise evident. Amara's brow furrowed. "Did she say she was coming?" Nathan shook his head but opened the door to greet her. Catherine stepped out, carrying a large bag and looking slightly nervous. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her voice tentative, "but I wanted to bring something for the baby." "You're always welcome here," Nathan assured her, stepping aside to let her in. Catherine's demeanor softened as she entered the cozy home. She placed the bag on the dining table and began pulling out its contents: hand-knitted blankets, baby clothes, and a small framed photograph of Sarah. "I thought it would be nice for her to know where she came from," Catherine said, her voice wavering. Amara picked up the photograph, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. "This means so much." Catherine stayed for lunch, and by the time she left, the air between them felt lighter. The visit had bridged the gap between their complicated past and the family they were building. The first snowfall of the season blanketed the Vermont countryside as Amara went into labor. Nathan, calm under pressure, helped her to the car and drove through the snowy road to the nearest hospital, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. Hours later, their daughter was born. The delivery room was filled with the sound of her first cries, a melody that brought tears to both of their eyes. "She's perfect," Nathan whispered, holding the tiny wriggling bundle in his arms. He passed her to Amara, who cradled her daughter with a mixture of awe and love. "What should we name her?" Amara asked, her voice hoarse but full of emotion. Nathan hesitated, then smiled. "Sophia," he said. "It feels right." Amara nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Sophia Pierce," she whispered. "Welcome to the world, little one." Back at the Vermont house, the first weeks of parenthood were both exhausting and magical. Nathan took on as much as he could, often waking in the middle of the night to soothe Sophia's cries. Amara marveled at his patience, her heart swelling with affection as she watched him bond with their daughter. One evening, as they sat by the fire with Sophia asleep in her bassinet, Nathan turned to Amara. "I've been thinking," he began, "about the company." Amara raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" "I don't want to leave Sophia and you behind, but I also don't want to abandon Pierce Innovations," he said. "What if we turn this place into an innovation retreat, a space where employees can come to work, recharge, and think outside the box?" Amara's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant. It could be exactly what the company needs. They spent the rest of the evening sketching out ideas, their excitement building. For the first time in months, the future felt not just possible, but bright. On Sophia's first night in her nursery, Amara and Nathan stood by the crib, watching her sleep. The room was filled with the soft glow of a nightlight, and the air was thick with the quiet hum of contentment. "We've come a long way," Amara said, her voice tinged with wonder. Nathan wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "And we've got a long way to go. But we'll do it together." Amara leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "I wouldn't have it any other way." As the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in a pristine white, Nathan and Amara knew they had found something rare, a love forged in adversity, strengthened by trust, and filled with hope for the future.